what it was really like to be a medieval peasant, and more. Imagine a time, long ago, when life was governed by the rhythm of the seasons, the land, and the eternal struggle for survival. In the medieval world, this struggle was felt by all, but it weighed most heavily on those at the very bottom of society, the peasants. Today, we take a journey back in time into the quiet, unforgiving life of a medieval peasant. As you settle in, close your eyes and allow the calm sound of my voice to guide you through this historical landscape. Imagine yourself there. Picture the world around you. The sights, the sounds, the very air that those who lived during this time would have breathed. It is a world where life was a constant cycle of labor, struggle, and survival. And yet, there is beauty in its simplicity, in its challenges, and in the very human effort to persevere. This is the story of the medieval peasant, a story of hardship and hope. Segment 1. What it was really like to be a medieval peasant. Part 1. The first rays of light creep through the cracks in the wooden shutters of your small, cold house. The room is dim, a soft gray light filtering in from the outside, barely strong enough to illuminate the rough, unpolished wooden beams of the ceiling. You are lying on a narrow bed, nothing more than a bed of straw covered with a coarse woolen blanket. The straw is thick, rough, and prickly, sticking to your skin. The smell of dampness is heavy in the air, a blend of wet earth and the faint, musty odor of old wood. It's a scent that lingers throughout the home, mingling with the scent of animals housed just outside the room, cattle, pigs, and chickens, whose low murmurs and soft rustlings fill the early morning silence. The house itself is small, barely enough to accommodate you and your family. It is made of crude timber, some of which is dark with age, while other parts are pale and weathered. The walls are made of wattle and daub, a mixture of woven branches and mud, which cracks and shifts over time. The roof is thatched with straw, sagging in places and covered in patches that leak when it rains. There are no windows to speak of, just small openings covered by shutters to let in the light and air. This is your world, a small, simple space where the harshness of the outside world seeps in, but also where warmth, however faint, can be found. You awaken to the sounds of the village stirring, the soft clanging of the blacksmith's hammer on his anvil, the cackling of chickens in the yard, and the distant murmur of your neighbors waking up. You feel the cold of the stone floor beneath your bare feet, a sharp contrast to the warmth of the blankets you've just left behind. Your eyes adjust to the dimness, and as you stand, you pull on your rough woolen tunic. The wool is thick, coarse, and it scratches against your skin, but it is warm enough to ward off the chill. Over it, you slip a plain leather belt to hold your trousers in place. Your shoes, if they can be called shoes, are nothing more than simple, worn leather sandals that have been patched and mended over the years. You pull on a thick woolen cloak, heavy with the weight of rain from the previous night, and as you step outside, the cold air greets you. Part 2. The village is waking up, slowly but surely. The buildings here are much like your own, though some are larger and perhaps more sturdy. The blacksmith's forge stands at the center, its chimney puffing smoke into the air, which is already thick with the smell of coal and iron. The forge itself is a low, stone building with a thatched roof, the flickering orange glow of the fire inside casting long shadows on the ground. From the chimney, a thin trail of smoke rises, drifting lazily in the cool morning air. The sound of the hammer ringing against the anvil is steady, almost like a metronome, as the blacksmith shapes hot metal into useful tools. His wife is outside, sweeping the dirt yard with a bundle of twigs tied together, the sound of the bristles scraping across the ground. As you walk through the village, the cobbled streets are covered in a thin layer of morning mist, swirling and rising like ghosts from the earth. The buildings are simple, most of them constructed of wattle and daub, with some made of sturdy timber or stone. The roofs are thatched, their straw arranged in neat bundles, but some are sagging with age, showing the wear of many winters. The air is cool, the scent of the earth damp from the early morning dew. The occasional rooster crows in the distance, cutting through the quiet stillness. Everything here is simple, raw, and rugged, yet it has a strange kind of beauty in its unpretentiousness. Your hands, already rough and calloused from years of labor, tighten around the handle of the plow as you step into the field. The soil beneath your feet is soft and damp, the earth still wet from last night's rain. The distant sound of the wind rustling through the trees is soothing, a soft murmur of nature that is both familiar and constant. The land is vast, stretching out before you, a patchwork of brown earth, green shoots, and yellowing grasses. It is both a gift and a burden. The land provides food, but it demands constant labor. It is an intimate connection, one that is both sustaining and exhausting. Part 3. The field is expansive, the soil turning beneath the wooden plow with a soft, rhythmic scrape. The oxen move steadily, their heavy hooves sinking into the earth with each step. Their breath is steady, their muscles working in harmony with the rhythm of the task. The air is thick with the scent of freshly turned soil, a deep, rich aroma that fills your nostrils as you guide the plow through the rows of crops. Each furrow you make feels like a small victory, but it is never enough. There's always more to do, always another field to till, another seed to plant. The sun climbs higher in the sky, and as it does, you feel the weight of the heat begin to press down on your shoulders. Your tunic sticks to your skin, soaked with sweat, and your hands ache from the constant pulling and pushing of the plow. Despite the discomfort, there is a strange kind of peace in the labor. The world around you is quiet, save for the occasional rustle of the wind or the distant clanging of the blacksmith's hammer. Your thoughts drift, and for a moment, you are lost in the rhythm of the work. But the peace is fleeting. The reality of your position never truly leaves you. The fear of hunger, the fear of not meeting the demands of the Lord, the fear of the tax collector, it is always there, a quiet, ever-present shadow. Part 4. By midday, the heat is unbearable. Your back aches from the constant bending, your muscles sore from the labor. Yet you push on. There is no choice. The land must be worked, the harvest must come in, or you will not survive the winter. Your body moves almost on its own, guided by the rhythm of the work. The oxen continue their steady pace, their hooves sinking into the earth with each pull. You pause only briefly to drink from the water skin that hangs at your waist, the cool water refreshing for just a moment before the heat of the day takes hold again. Around you, the land stretches out in every direction. The fields are vast, their green crops swaying gently in the breeze. The smell of fresh earth mingles with the scent of wildflowers that fill the landscape. The sky above is a brilliant blue, but the oppressive heat makes it feel as though the air is thick, pressing down on you with a weight that seems to grow heavier with each passing moment.
Part 5.
As the sun begins to dip toward the horizon, a sense of relief washes over you. The end of the day is near, but there is still much to be done. The tax collector's visit looms large in your mind. It is an unwelcome task, one that you dread, but it is inevitable. The Lord's demands are unrelenting, and there is no escaping them. You are but a cog in the great machine of feudal society, and the taxes you owe will not be forgiven. As you make your way back to the village, your feet heavy with the exhaustion of the day, you find your thoughts drifting to your family. At home, the fire will be crackling, casting flickering shadows on the walls of your small house. The warmth from the hearth is always a welcome comfort, though it is fleeting. There is always work to be done. The barn must be secured, the animals fed, and the children put to bed. The world around you begins to darken, the shadows lengthening as the last rays of the sun slip away. The village is quiet now, save for the occasional sound of laughter or the low murmur of voices from the neighboring houses. The familiar sounds of the night begin to settle in, and for a moment, you feel a sense of peace. It is brief, but it is there. Part 6. Night falls and the air cools, the stars beginning to twinkle faintly overhead. The world is quiet, save for the gentle sounds of the night, the chirping of crickets, the rustle of leaves in the breeze. You sit by the fire, your body sore and tired, and for a brief moment, you allow yourself to rest. The day has been long, but it is over now. Tomorrow, the cycle will begin again. As you close your eyes and drift off to sleep, the warmth from the fire is a comforting reminder that, despite the hardships, you are not alone. The rhythm of life continues, steady and unyielding, but it is a rhythm that you have learned to accept. In this simplicity, there is peace. As the village fully awoke, the true weight of peasant existence settled in, a life bound to the soil, governed by tradition, and shaped by unrelenting labor. Imagine stepping outside into the damp morning air, your breath forming faint clouds before you. The narrow dirt paths, churned by footsteps and hooves, led past clustered cottages with their sagging roofs and crooked wooden doors. Each home was much the same, small, smoky, built for function, not comfort. Yet within these humble walls, generations had lived, loved, and endured. The field stretched beyond the village like a patchwork quilt, long, narrow strips divided among families, their boundaries marked by rough stones or gnarled sticks. The earth was dark and heavy, still wet from the dew, as men and women trudged toward their plots with tools slung over their shoulders. Their hands, calloused and cracked from seasons of toil, gripped wooden plows or iron-tipped hoes. There were no horses for most peasants, only the strength of their own backs or, if they were fortunate, an ox to share among several families. The work was monotonous, backbreaking, yet vital. Each movement was deliberate, honed by years of repetition. Bending to pull weeds, scattering seeds in practiced arcs, turning the soil in slow, measured rows. There was no hurry, for time moved differently here. The sun dictated the pace, climbing steadily as sweat gathered on brows and trickled down sun-leathered necks. The children, too young for heavy labor, might herd geese or gather firewood, their small hands never idle. Clothing was simple but sturdy. Rough spun tunics dyed in muted shades of brown or green, cinched with belts of braided rope or leather. Women wore long skirts, their hems perpetually stained with mud, and woolen shawls draped over their shoulders. Men's trousers were tied at the waist and ankles, the fabric worn thin at the knees. In winter, layers of wool kept out the cold, though the damp always seeped in eventually. Footwear, if any, was crude, leather wraps or wooden clogs that clacked against the stones. The village itself was a living thing, its heartbeat measured in chores and rituals. At the communal oven, women took turns baking bread, the smoky aroma mingling with the scent of herbs hung to dry under eaves. The blacksmith's hammer rang sporadically, a distant metronome to the day. Near the well, gossip was exchanged in low tones, news of a birth, a quarrel, the Lord's latest decree. The church loomed at the village center, its stone walls a reminder of faith's omnipresence, its bell tolling for prayers that punctuated the hours. And yet, amid the drudgery, there were moments of quiet contentment. The shared meal at midday, bread, cheese, perhaps a thin stew of beans and onions, eaten in the shade of a tree. The rare festivals where ale flowed and laughter rose above the usual murmur. The warmth of the hearth at night, where stories were told in flickering firelight, weaving tales of saints, spirits, and far-off lands none would ever see. But always, the land called them back. For the peasant, there was no true rest, only the turning of the seasons, the endless cycle of sowing and reaping, of surviving another year. And as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the fields in gold and shadow, they returned to their cottages, their bodies weary, their minds resigned to the rhythm of a life that would change little before the grave. And so the day ended as it had begun in the quiet, unyielding embrace of the medieval world. Segment 2. The Biography of Thomas Becket.
Part 1.
The year is 1118. The early morning light filters through the stained glass windows of a modest yet well-worn church in the heart of London. A faint scent of incense lingers in the air, mingling with the cool stone walls and the distant murmur of prayers from the monks and the faithful. You can almost hear the echo of the Gregorian chant drifting from the cloisters, a solemn sound that fills the space with reverence. The grand cathedral stands before you, its soaring spires rising into the gray sky, catching the first glint of dawn. It is a place of power, a silent witness to the shifting tides of history. In this religious environment, Thomas Becket was born, a man whose life would become as turbulent and controversial as the very cathedral that sheltered his early years. As a child, he was surrounded by the opulence of the Norman elite, the scent of rich tapestries, and the clang of armor filling the corridors of his childhood home. Becket's family was wealthy, his father a merchant of high rank, which allowed Thomas to live in a world of privilege, yet he was not immune to the undercurrents of politics and religion that defined the era. The young Thomas was educated in the finest schools, surrounded by scholars and theologians, where he learned Latin, the language of the church, and the intricacies of medieval law and philosophy. His formal education was paired with the lessons of the court, where he rubbed shoulders with nobles and politicians. The architecture of these courts was grand, with long hallways draped in velvet and rich tapestries, thick with the smell of polished wood and stone. The robes of the nobility were elaborate, the gold stitching glinting under the heavy chandeliers that illuminated the court. These experiences, though distant from the simplicity of peasant life, shaped the character of Thomas Becket, who was both a man of faith and a man of the court, torn between two worlds.
Part 2.
By the age of 30, Thomas Becket's life took a pivotal turn. In 1154, King Henry II, recognizing his talent, appointed Becket as Chancellor of England, a position of immense power that came with great responsibility. The halls of Westminster, the seat of power in England, stood in stark contrast to the humble abbey where Thomas had spent his youth. Westminster was a sprawling stone fortress, its architecture commanding and imposing, its high arches echoing with the footsteps of those who walked its vast halls. The flicker of torchlight cast dancing shadows along the stone walls, and the thick, rich carpets beneath your feet muffled the sound of footsteps as you walked through the corridors of power. As Chancellor, Becket wore the fine robes of his office, heavy silks and velvets, embroidered with the insignia of the king. He carried with him the aura of authority, the weight of the crowns well reflected in his bearing. But even as he rose to power, there was a constant internal struggle within him. The king was a man of ambition, a ruler who sought to centralize power and bend the church to his will. Becket, though loyal to Henry, was a man of deep faith, bound by his belief in the sanctity of the church's independence. In private moments, Thomas often found himself torn between loyalty to the crown and loyalty to God, a tension that would shape the course of his life. Inside the stone halls of Westminster, there was always the scent of wax from the candles that lit the vast chambers, mingling with the faint smell of old parchment and ink. The chambers were vast, filled with the noise of scribes and advisors. The courtiers and nobles moved through these spaces in their grand, colorful tunics and fur-lined cloaks, the gleam of gold and silver catching the light from the high windows. These were the people with whom Thomas Becket would begin to make his mark, yet within him there remained a profound inner conflict. Part 3. It was in the year 1162 that Thomas Becket's life would take a dramatic turn. The death of Archbishop Theobald of Canterbury left a vacancy in the church, and it was King Henry II who decided to place his trusted chancellor, Thomas Becket, into the position of archbishop. At first, it seemed like a natural progression. Becket's loyalty to the king had been unwavering, and he had risen to power by Henry's side. But the moment Becket donned the archbishop's robes, everything changed. The rich, flowing robes of the archbishop were unlike any Becket had worn before, deep crimson and gold, adorned with religious symbols. The fabric was luxurious, heavy, and warm against his skin, but with it came the weight of an entirely new responsibility. It was no longer a matter of serving the crown. Now, he served God, and his duties to the church became his sole focus. The church in Canterbury was a vast, awe-inspiring place, its stone walls towering over all who entered. The smell of incense and candle wax filled the air, and the high vaulted ceilings seemed to stretch forever, a reminder of the power of the church. The golden light from the stained glass windows cast colorful patterns onto the stone floor, painting the ground with a faint, ethereal glow. The sense of solemnity was overwhelming, and it was here that Becket, now Archbishop, would find himself increasingly at odds with the king he had once served so faithfully. Becket's internal struggle grew more intense. As he walked the hallowed halls of the cathedral, the heavy responsibility of his position weighed on his mind. The robes he wore now seemed to be more than just fabric. They were a symbol of the burden he carried. The sounds of the monks chanting in the background, the smell of the incense filling the air, served as a constant reminder of the sacred duty he had sworn to uphold. Yet, his heart was still tied to the loyalty he had once felt toward Henry, the king who had elevated him from a mere clerk to the Archbishop of Canterbury.
Part 4.
The conflict between Thomas Becket and King Henry II soon became impossible to ignore. The two men, once close allies, now found themselves on opposite sides of a great political divide. Henry's desire to assert royal control over the church clashed with Becket's unwavering belief in the independence of the clergy. The archbishop, now draped in his sacred vestments, would no longer bend to the will of the crown. It was a subtle but profound transformation. The fine silks of his archbishop's robes now felt heavier than ever, and each step he took within the great cathedral seemed to echo in the stone halls, a reminder of the growing chasm between him and the king. The great halls of the palace, where once the sounds of laughter and revelry had filled the air, now stood in silence as Henry's anger grew. The atmosphere in these rooms was different now, tense, thick with the weight of unresolved conflict. The long wooden tables, once filled with feasts, now seemed stark and cold, reflecting the fracture between the two former allies. Becket, however, remained resolute, his faith driving him even as the pressure from the king grew. His robes rustled with each movement, the heavy fabric catching the light as he walked through the corridors of power, feeling the burden of his choices. The king's frustration grew as Becket refused to compromise on matters of church authority. Letters were exchanged, heated discussions took place, and the tension between them reached a boiling point. But Becket's internal conflict was still present. He was a man torn between two worlds, the world of the church, with its sacred duties, and the world of the crown, with its earthly power. The cathedral's cold stone walls, the flickering candlelight, and the smell of incense all served to heighten the solemnity of his position. Yet in his heart, there was still the sense of loss. The loss of the close friendship he had once shared with Henry, now replaced by an ever-growing tension.
Part 5.
In 1170, the tension finally reached its breaking point. Thomas Becket was excommunicated from the church by the Pope, and the king's patience wore thin. The political pressure mounted on Becket, and soon after, for knights, acting under the king's orders, made their way to Canterbury. The cold winter air of December cut through the streets as they approached the cathedral, where Becket had taken refuge, determined to stand firm in his beliefs. The knights, their heavy armor creaking as they moved, entered the great stone church, their boots echoing loudly against the cold floor. The cathedral was dark, the only light coming from the flickering candles on the altar. As the knights approached Becket, clad in his archbishop's robes, there was no turning back. The once bright crimson and gold of his vestments seemed to dull in the dim light of the church. His hands, folded in prayer, trembled ever so slightly, but his face remained steadfast. The sound of swords being unsheathed cut through the stillness. Becket's fate was sealed. The knights struck him down, and the cathedral was filled with the sound of his fall, a soft thud, almost imperceptible, against the cold stone floor.
Part 6.
Thomas Becket's death marked the tragic culmination of his internal struggle. He had been a man caught between two loyalties, to the church and to the crown. In the end, his unwavering faith and dedication to the church led to his martyrdom. His body, draped in the very robes that had once weighed heavily upon him, now lay lifeless in the cold stone cathedral. The scent of incense still hung in the air, and the faint glow of candlelight flickered across his face as a soul departed from this world. The news of Becket's death sent shockwaves through England, reverberating across the stone walls of the cathedrals and courts alike. His martyrdom became a symbol of the church's power, and his name was forever etched into the annals of history. The knights, clad in their heavy armor, left the cathedral as quietly as they had entered, their footsteps echoing in the now silent space. The echoes of Becket's life, his struggle, and his ultimate sacrifice would linger in the air for centuries to come. Thomas Becket was a man of remarkable transformation, whose life and death would leave an indelible mark on both England and the church. Born around 1119 into a family of wealthy merchants, Becket's early years were shaped by the opulence of London's elite, yet his future would take him far from the comforts of his youth. He was a man of contrasts, deeply devout, yet a man of the court, loyal to the crown, yet fiercely protective of the church's autonomy. His journey from a loyal servant of King Henry II to the Archbishop of Canterbury marked a pivotal shift in the balance of power between the monarchy and the church in medieval England. Before his rise to the archbishopric, Thomas had served as King Henry's chancellor, a position that placed him at the heart of royal politics. He was known for his sharp intellect, his organizational skill, and his devotion to the king's ambitions. As a result, Becket was often regarded as Henry's right-hand man. However, this close relationship would set the stage for a monumental change when Becket was appointed as Archbishop of Canterbury in 1162. Upon accepting the position, his priorities shifted dramatically. The man who once shared Henry's vision of a powerful, centralized monarchy was now at odds with him, fiercely defending the independence and authority of the church. Becket's significance lies in his unwavering belief that the church must remain free from secular interference. He fought relentlessly for the rights of the clergy, particularly against Henry's attempts to control church matters through royal influence. This conflict culminated in his martyrdom in 1170, when 4 of the king's knights, acting under Henry's implicit command, killed Becket inside Canterbury Cathedral. His death was not just the loss of a man, but the symbolic defeat of the monarch's encroachment on the church's sacred authority. Thomas Becket's sacrifice marked a turning point in the struggle for church and state relations. His martyrdom made him a saint and a symbol of religious independence, inspiring a wave of reform that would echo through the centuries. His legacy lives on not only in his canonization, but in the reminder that the struggle for justice, faith, and the preservation of sacred rights must often come at great personal cost. In the midst of the medieval world's rigid hierarchies, where peasants toiled in obscurity and nobles reveled in privilege, there occasionally emerged figures who defied expectation, whose lives became pivot points in history. One such man was Thomas Becket, a name that would echo through the centuries, not for his birth, but for his defiance. Born in London around 1118, Becket's origins were neither peasant nor noble, but somewhere in between, the son of a prosperous merchant, a man of the rising urban class. His childhood was one of relative comfort, yet it lacked the ancient bloodlines that opened doors to true power. Still, he was educated, sharp-witted, and ambitious. And in a world where the church was the surest ladder to influence, young Thomas climbed swiftly. By his 30s, he had entered the service of Theobald, Archbishop of Canterbury, where his keen mind and administrative skill caught the eye of a king, Henry II, the fiery Plantagenet ruler who sought to bend England to his will. The two men, though of different worlds, formed an unlikely friendship. Henry, the warrior king with a temper as fierce as his red hair, and Becket, the clever cleric with a taste for finery and diplomacy. In 1155, Henry made a decision that would alter both their fates. He appointed Thomas as his chancellor, the highest royal official in the land. It was a calculated move. Becket, though a churchman, served the crown with zeal, enforcing Henry's laws, raising taxes, even leading knights into battle. He lived lavishly, wearing silks and furs, hosting feasts that rivaled the king's own. To many, it seemed he had chosen his allegiance, power over piety. But then came the twist of fate, the moment that would unravel everything. When the Archbishop of Canterbury died in 1161, Henry saw an opportunity. He pushed for Becket's appointment, believing his loyal friend would keep the church in line. The king wanted control over ecclesiastical courts, over the clergy, who often escaped royal justice. He expected compliance. What he got was transformation. From the moment Thomas Becket became archbishop, he changed. Gone were the silks and feasts. In their place came sackcloth, fasting, and a fierce devotion to the church's independence. He resisted Henry's reforms, declaring that God's law stood above the king's. The friendship curdled into bitter rivalry. Letters flew between them, at first diplomatic, then accusing, then furious. Henry, prone to rages, famously cried out in frustration, "Will no one rid me of this turbulent priest?" And then, on a cold December evening in 1170, for knights took those words as their king's command. The murder of Thomas Becket in Canterbury Cathedral, cut down before the altar, his blood staining the sacred stones, shook Christendom. Miracles were reported at his tomb almost immediately. Within 2 years, he was declared a saint, and Henry, horrified by the backlash, performed public penance, walking barefoot through Canterbury as monks scourged him. The king's reforms crumbled. The church's power grew stronger. But Becket's legacy was more than political. He became a symbol of resistance to tyranny, of the cost of conviction, of the sudden, startling ways a man can change. Pilgrims flocked to his shrine for centuries, their footsteps wearing grooves into the cathedral's stone. And in the shadows of castles and cottages alike, his story whispered a dangerous truth, that even kings could be defied. The shockwaves of Becket's murder rippled far beyond Canterbury. In a society where the church and crown were locked in an eternal dance of power, his martyrdom tipped the scales. Suddenly, the clergy had a saintly champion, and kings had to tread carefully. For the common people, Becket's sainthood became a beacon of hope. Peasants who had never met him now prayed to St. Thomas, seeing in his defiance a reflection of their own silent struggles against lords and masters. His shrine, glittering with offerings, became a place where even the lowliest could seek solace, a rare quality in death that life had denied them. For the nobility and monarchy, the lesson was clear. The church was not to be trifled with. Future kings still clashed with popes and bishops, but none forgot the spectacle of Henry II's humiliation. The balance of power had shifted, if only slightly, toward the spiritual realm. And in the grand tapestry of history, Beckett's story endured, a reminder that the medieval world, for all its rigidity, could still be upended by a single man's choices, and that sometimes the most turbulent priests are the ones history remembers longest. Segment 3. The Mystery of Medieval Witch Hunts. Part 1. Imagine yourself in a quiet, secluded village nestled in the rolling hills of medieval Europe. The air is cool and crisp, the scent of damp earth rising as the mist rolls over the valley. The buildings around you are made of wattle and daub, their thatched roofs sagging under the weight of years of rain and snow. The village square is small, barely wide enough for the carts and livestock that make their way through each day. The cobblestones beneath your feet are uneven, weathered by centuries of use, their once smooth surfaces now rough with time. It is here, in this quiet corner of the world, that the whispers of fear and suspicion begin to stir. The villagers gather in small groups, their heads bent low, speaking in hushed tones. You can hear the soft rustling of the wind in the trees, but the chatter of the crowd is louder now, carrying with it a sense of unease. A woman has been accused, an old widow who lives on the outskirts of town, her cottage tucked into the shadows of the forest. The accusations are vague, but they are enough. She is said to be a witch, a practitioner of dark magic. The fear in the air is palpable, thick with superstition and ancient beliefs that have taken root in the hearts of the people. The village itself seems to close in around you, the once welcoming homes now dark and uninviting. The windows of the cottages are tightly shuttered, and the smoke from chimneys rises in thin curls, as though even the village itself is trying to shut out the fear. The sounds of the day, children playing, livestock bleating, are muted now, replaced by the tense murmurs of suspicion. The women gather in small circles, their heads wrapped in simple woolen scarves, the long skirts they wear rustling as they move. Their faces are grim, their eyes darting toward the woman who is said to be cursed. The architecture of the village, once a familiar and safe space, now seems foreign. The low, stone walls of the buildings seem to close in, their heavy wooden beams supporting roofs that sag under the weight of time and the oppressive atmosphere. Every creak of the floorboards beneath your feet seems amplified, every step echoing through the narrow alleys. The village square, once a place of community, is now a place of judgment, and the weight of the accusations feels as heavy as the looming clouds above.
Part 2.
As the sun begins to set, the village grows quieter, the shadows deepening with the approaching night. The temperature drops, and a biting chill settles in the air, creeping into your bones. The wooden doors of the cottages are bolted shut, the flickering light of the hearths the only source of warmth. Outside, the wind picks up, sending a chill through the trees and the tall grasses that line the outskirts of the village. The night is closing in, and with it comes the fear of what is to come. A small group of men, dressed in rough woolen tunics and heavy leather boots, stand at the edge of the square. They are the village's authorities, the ones who will carry out the judgment. Their faces are grim, their eyes narrowed with suspicion. The man at the front, a local priest, wears a simple robe, the hem frayed from years of use. He holds a small wooden staff, his fingers wrapped tightly around it, as though it is a lifeline in this growing storm of fear. Beside him is a sheriff, his tunic darker, his belt heavy with the tools of his trade, the keys to the village prison, the rope for binding, the hammer for knocking at doors. His boots are thick with mud, the soles worn down by years of standing watch over the village. As they approach the woman's cottage, the villagers fall silent. The rhythmic sound of their footsteps echoes down the narrow lanes, muffled by the walls of the stone buildings. The night is still, save for the distant sound of an owl hooting in the trees. The woman, pale and hunched, stands in the doorway of her cottage. She wears a simple gown, the fabric faded and threadbare, its edges tattered from years of wear. Her face is weathered, her hair thin and graying, but it is her eyes that stand out, eyes that seem to carry the weight of years of isolation, years of being pushed to the edge of the village and society. The air around her seems to thicken as the men approach. There is a moment of silence, the kind that feels as though the entire world is holding its breath. The villagers, standing in the shadows, watch intently, their faces hard, their hearts heavy with suspicion. The priest raises his hand, and with a stern voice, he declares the woman guilty of witchcraft. The sound of his words seems to hang in the air, reverberating through the village like the ringing of a bell. Part 3. The woman's eyes widen, her breath catching in her chest as the accusations are laid bare. She begins to tremble, but not from fear. There is a defiance in her, a quiet strength that seems to surge through her fragile body. The priest, his face set in a stern, unyielding expression, steps closer, his staff tapping against the ground with each movement. The sheriff moves forward as well, his hands ready to bind her, to take her away from her home and into the darkness of the village's prison. The crowd remains silent, their gazes fixed on the woman, their eyes hard with the weight of their own fears and beliefs. The woman's cottage, once a sanctuary of peace and solitude, now feels like a cage. The walls, thick with the scent of burning wood and herbs, seem to close in on her, trapping her in a moment of unrelenting judgment. Her hands, trembling, clutch the hem of her gown, her knuckles white from the pressure. Her breath comes in shallow, ragged gasps, but her eyes remain steady. She is a woman who has lived alone, away from the judgments of the village, and now, in this moment, she faces the consequences of that solitude. The men, standing in their rough woolen tunics and leather boots, seem like figures of authority, yet there is a quiet tension in their stance. They are not the confident figures of justice, but men who are weighed down by their own doubts. The air around them seems thick with uncertainty, as though they are not entirely sure of what they are doing. The priest, his robe swishing as he moves, looks to the sheriff, as though seeking validation for what he has already declared. The sheriff, silent, only nods, his hand on the hilt of his dagger.
Part 4.
As the woman is bound and led away, the crowd begins to disperse, but the tension lingers in the air. The weight of the night presses down on the village, the cold wind carrying the echoes of the events that have just unfolded. The buildings around you seem to loom larger now, the walls of the cottages seeming to close in on you as you walk through the streets. The villagers are quiet, their faces hard and unreadable, their eyes downcast as they retreat into their homes. The sound of the woman's footsteps, slow and heavy, can be heard in the distance as she is led away. The village square, once alive with the chatter of the market and the bustle of daily life, is now eerily quiet. The torches flicker in the wind, their light casting long, dancing shadows across the stone streets. The moon rises higher in the sky, its pale light casting a ghostly glow over the village. In the distance, the prison door creaks as it is shut behind the woman, and the sound of it echoes through the still night. The villagers, safe in their homes, lie in their beds, their minds heavy with the events of the day. The village, once a peaceful place, is now marked by fear. Fear of the unknown, fear of the witch, and fear of what might happen next. The walls of the homes feel colder now, the air thicker with the weight of the judgment that has been passed.
Part 5.
The days that follow are filled with whispered conversations and furtive glances. The woman's trial is set to take place soon, but already the villagers have made up their minds. Her fate is sealed, and the tension in the village is palpable. The streets are quieter, the air thicker with fear. The market, once a place of lively exchange, is now hushed, the traders speaking in low voices, their gazes shifting nervously as they pass one another. The women, still dressed in their plain woolen gowns, now wear their scarves tighter, their heads bent low as they walk through the village. There is no more laughter in the streets, no more singing from the children. The village has become a place of suspicion, a place where even the smallest act is scrutinized, where the shadows of doubt seem to loom over everything. The buildings, their stone walls weathered and worn, now feel like prisons, enclosing the villagers in a world of fear and uncertainty. The night comes quickly now, the long shadows creeping across the village square, and once again, the air is filled with the scent of burning wood and the distant sound of the wind rustling through the trees. The women gather in small groups, their faces drawn tight with worry. There is no escape from the fear that has settled over the village, no way to silence the whispers that seem to echo through the streets. The fear of witchcraft has become a reality, and it is a reality that no one can escape. Part 6. The day of the trial arrives, and the village square is filled with people, their faces tense, their bodies stiff with anxiety. The courthouse, a simple stone building with heavy wooden doors, stands at the center of the square. It is cold inside, the stone walls echoing with every word spoken. The woman stands before the judge, her hands bound, her face pale but resolute. She is dressed in a plain gown, its fabric faded and worn, her long, gray hair falling loosely around her shoulders. The trial is a spectacle, with the villagers gathered in a tense silence. The priest stands beside the judge, his voice low but firm as he accuses her of witchcraft. The woman remains silent, her eyes cast downward, her expression unreadable. The crowd watches, the tension in the air almost unbearable. The moment of judgment is at hand, and no one knows what will happen next. As the verdict is announced, a sense of finality settles over the crowd. The woman is condemned, but the village is left with a lingering sense of unease. The judgment has been passed, but the fear, the suspicion, and the uncertainty remain. The village, once a place of community and peace, is now marked by the shadow of witchcraft, and it will never be the same again. As the embers of the hearth flickered in peasant cottages and the bells of monasteries tolled through the mist, another, darker force stirred in the medieval mind: the fear of witchcraft. Not the fairy tale hags of later centuries, but something far more insidious, an invisible terror woven into the fabric of daily life. Why did witch hunts happen? Why did neighbors turn on neighbors, accusing old women of blighting crops or sickening children? The answer lies not in magic, but in the collision of faith, famine, and fear. Imagine a village after a poor harvest. The grain stores are empty, the livestock thin. A child falls ill with a fever no herb can cure. The priest speaks of God's wrath, but the people crave a simpler explanation, a culprit they can see, punish, and destroy. And so, fingers point to the reclusive widow who talks to cats, or the midwife whose remedies sometimes fail. Suspicion festers like a wound. But the witch hunts were more than mere superstition. They were a tool used by both church and state. In 1484, Pope Innocent VIII declared witchcraft a heresy in his papal bull Summis Desiderans Effectibus, unleashing inquisitors to root out the servants of Satan. Suddenly, the invisible became criminal. Torture extracted confessions. Fear spread like wildfire. And yet, the true mystery is not why people believed in witches, but why, after centuries of coexistence, the hunts exploded when they did. The answer lies in the cracks of a changing world. The Black Death had shattered trust in institutions. The Reformation split Christendom in two, each side accusing the other of devilry. Women, especially those without male protection, healers, spinsters, the poor, became easy targets in a society that feared the unknown. By the 16th century, the panic reached its peak. In Germany, entire villages were emptied. In Scotland, the king himself wrote a treatise on witchcraft. The accused faced trials by water, bound and thrown into ponds, for water rejected the wicked. If they floated, they were guilty. If they sank, they were innocent but often dead. And then, as suddenly as it began, the fever broke. The Enlightenment brought skepticism. Laws shifted. The last execution in Europe was in 1782, but the scars remained. In empty villages, in family shame, in the collective memory of how easily fear turns to cruelty. The witch hunts left no spellbooks, no cauldrons, only court records and screams in the dark. Their true horror was not magic, but what ordinary people could be made to do when they believed the devil walked among them. To understand the witch hunts, we must trace their hidden logic. The accused were rarely random. Over 80% were women, often elderly, poor, or living on the margins of society. Midwives were targeted, their knowledge of birth and herbs seen as suspicious. The witch's mark, a mole or scar, became proof of a pact with the devil, sought out by prickers with needles. Yet geography mattered too. Regions with weak central authorities saw more hunts as local feuds fueled accusations. In contrast, areas with strong courts, like Italy, had fewer trials but harsher punishments. The hunts were not chaos, but a system. one that revealed medieval society's deepest anxieties: fear of female autonomy, of failed harvests, of a world where gods seemed silent. And in the end, the witch hunts changed Europe. They weakened trust in communities. They reinforced the power of the church and state over personal freedoms. And they left a warning, one that echoes in our own eras of panic about what happens when fear is weaponized. The witches of history may not have been real, but the fires that consumed them were. And in their ashes, we glimpse the darkest corners of the medieval mind. Segment 4. The Privileges of the Nobility. Part 1. Picture yourself stepping through the towering gates of a medieval castle, the stone walls rising up to the heavens, casting long shadows over the courtyard. The air is different here, thicker with a sense of power, authority, and a quiet wealth that seeps into every stone and every flicker of candlelight. As you walk through the entrance, the cobblestones beneath your feet are smooth and well-maintained, worn down by centuries of noble feet that have tread here, but still firm and solid. The sound of your footsteps echoes through the courtyard, bouncing off the towering walls of the castle. In the distance, the high turrets of the castle pierce the sky, their sharp peaks adorned with fluttering banners, the colors rich and vibrant against the dull gray of the stone. The keep, the heart of the castle, looms large, its windows small and narrow, designed to withstand the elements and any potential threats. The grand wooden doors that lead into the main hall are adorned with intricate carvings of mythical creatures, their eyes seemingly alive with fierce, protective gazes. Inside, the great hall is a world unto itself. The flickering light of torches on the stone walls casts a warm, golden glow on the heavy wooden beams that support the high, vaulted ceiling. The scent of roasting meat and freshly baked bread fills the air, mixing with the smoky haze from the torches. The floor is covered with large, ornate rugs, their threads vibrant with reds and golds, a stark contrast to the cold, unforgiving stone beneath. The walls are adorned with tapestries depicting scenes of battle, of triumphs, and of the noble lineage of the family that owns this fortress. The grandeur of the room is overwhelming, the vast space almost intimidating in its design. The nobles, dressed in their finest silks and velvets, move gracefully through the hall. Their tunics shimmer with gold thread, and their cloaks trail behind them, embroidered with their family crest. Their jewelry catches the light as they walk, their rings adorned with gems, their necklaces heavy with precious metals. The air around them seems to hum with the quiet confidence of those who know their place in the world. At the top, far removed from the struggles of the peasants and common folk.
Part 2.
The feast is already in full swing when you enter the hall. The long wooden tables are laden with food: roast boar, venison, fresh fruits, and loaves of bread so large they could feed an entire village. The sweet smell of honey and wine drifts through the air, mixing with the earthy scent of the meats. The nobles sit at the head of the table, their chairs high-backed and carved from dark oak, adorned with gold trim. The table itself is lined with golden goblets, their surfaces glinting in the light, and platters made of polished silver, heaping with delicacies that seem beyond the reach of the average person. The nobles speak in soft voices, their laughter light and easy, the conversation flowing as freely as the wine. They are dressed in rich fabrics, their garments meticulously tailored to show off the wealth and power they hold. Men wear velvet doublets adorned with intricate gold embroidery, the fabric so fine it seems to shimmer in the candlelight. Their pants, or hose, are made of soft leather, their boots polished and tall, reaching up to their knees. The women wear flowing gowns made of silk and satin, their sleeves wide and bell-shaped, cinched at the waist with a golden belt. Their hair is adorned with jeweled tiaras and braids that shimmer with precious stones. The atmosphere is one of luxury, of indulgence, and of complete separation from the world of the peasants who toil under the hot sun in the fields. Here, in the safety of the castle walls, there is no worry about hunger or survival. The nobles speak of politics, of the alliances they are forging, and of the power they wield over the land. It is a world where every need is met, every desire fulfilled, and where the concerns of the common folk are nothing more than distant whispers, irrelevant to the lives of the powerful. Yet, despite the grandeur, there is an underlying tension. The nobles may live in luxury, but they are not immune to the forces of ambition and rivalry. Whispers of betrayal and intrigue circulate through the halls, and even as they feast, the seeds of future conflict are being sown in the corners of the room. Beneath the laughter, there is the quiet murmur of plotting, of scheming, and of the ever-present drive for more power, more land, and more influence.
Part 3.
As the evening wears on, the festivities continue, but there is a subtle shift in the mood of the hall. The revelry, once light and carefree, begins to take on a more serious tone. The nobles turn their conversation toward matters of governance, of taxes, and of the upkeep of their vast estates. The food continues to flow, and the wine keeps being poured, but there is a palpable shift in the energy of the room. The laughter grows more forced, the smiles more strained, and the conversations more guarded. The mood in the hall mirrors the atmosphere outside the castle walls, where the villagers work long hours in the fields, their backs bent in labor, their faces weathered by the harsh conditions. They have no such luxury, no such indulgence. Their lives are ruled by the rhythm of the seasons, by the whims of the weather, and by the demands of the Lord. The castle, with its stone walls and opulent chambers, is a world apart, a world that the peasants can only dream of, and yet one that is as distant and unattainable as the stars in the sky. As the nobles speak of their estates, their lands, and their privileges, you can feel the weight of their power and the distance between them and the people they rule. Their concerns are not the same as the concerns of the peasants. They do not worry about the next harvest, the next rain, or the next crop failure. They do not fear the tax collector or the hunger that might come in the winter months. Their world is one of abundance, of power, and of control. The women in the hall, still adorned in their rich gowns, begin to gather in smaller groups, speaking quietly among themselves. Their laughter has subsided, replaced by murmurs of strategy, of social alliances, and of the movements of the powerful men around them. Their eyes flicker nervously toward the men at the head of the table, the lords whose decisions will affect their futures. The women's gowns, though beautiful, seem to weigh heavily on them now. Their fine silks and velvets, which had once felt like a mark of their status, now seem like a symbol of the delicate power they hold, a power that can be easily lost in the shifting tides of politics.
Part 4.
Night falls, and the atmosphere in the hall grows even more somber. The torches flicker in the breeze, casting long shadows across the faces of the guests. The feast has come to an end, and the conversation has turned to matters of strategy and influence. The lords and ladies discuss their alliances, the marriages they are arranging for their children, and the ways in which they can expand their territories. The low murmur of their voices is punctuated by the occasional clink of silverware on the fine china, the soft swish of silk as the women adjust their gowns, and the sound of boots on the stone floor as the men stand to move toward the large oak doors. The grand hall is now quiet, save for the crackling of the fire in the hearth, which casts a warm glow on the faces of the remaining guests. The wooden beams above creak and groan under the weight of centuries of history, the stories of kings and knights, of battles fought and won, of power consolidated and lost. The walls, lined with tapestries depicting scenes of conquest and glory, seem to hold the weight of those stories, reminding the nobles of the legacy they must uphold. As you look around, you realize that the nobility's life is not one of peace, despite the wealth and comfort they enjoy. There is an underlying anxiety that permeates the castle. It is the anxiety of maintaining power, of ensuring that the family's name is remembered, and that the wealth continues to flow. Even here, in this luxurious setting, there is a constant struggle for dominance, a subtle war being waged in the shadows of the Grand Hall. Part 5. The castle, despite its imposing architecture and its grandeur, is not immune to the passage of time. The walls, though thick and solid, have begun to show signs of wear. The wood of the beams, once smooth and polished, now bears the scars of age. The windows, though adorned with colorful glass, are cracked and drafty, allowing the chill of the night to creep in. The tapestries that once depicted scenes of victory are now faded and torn, their colors dulled by the years. The castle, like its occupants, is a reflection of the shifting tides of history, of the rise and fall of empires. The nobles, too, have begun to feel the weight of time. Their fine clothes, though still elegant and rich, are beginning to show signs of wear. The silk of their gowns, once crisp and smooth, has begun to lose its sheen. The heavy jewelry they wear, once a symbol of their status, now seems more like a reminder of the fleeting nature of their power. The laughter that once filled the hall has subsided, replaced by the quiet murmur of conversation, the whispers of deals made in the shadows, and the sense of unease that now fills the space. As the night wears on, the nobles slowly begin to retire to their chambers, their steps heavy with the weight of the day. The castle grows quiet, the torches flickering out one by one, leaving only the soft glow of the hearth to light the darkened halls. The world outside remains unchanged, vast, silent, and indifferent to the struggles within the walls of the castle. And so, the cycle continues, the privileged lives of the nobility carrying on, but always marked by the quiet knowledge that nothing, not even power, lasts forever. Part 6. The dawn breaks over the castle, casting a soft light over the stone walls. The courtyard, now bathed in the first light of day, is quiet, save for the occasional bird call. The gates of the castle stand open, and the nobles begin their day anew, ready to resume their roles in the ever-turning wheel of power. But the luxury, the opulence, and the security they enjoy are never far from their minds. The nobility live with the knowledge that their world, for all its grandeur, is built upon the foundation of centuries of labor by those who live outside the walls, in the fields and villages, in the shadow of their castles. And so, the cycle continues. The nobility, with their wealth and their privilege, go on with their lives, separated from the struggles of the common folk, yet bound to them in a web of power and dependence. The walls of the castle may protect them from the outside world, but they cannot protect them from the passing of time, from the inevitable changes that come with the rise and fall of dynasties. Yet for now, they remain at the top, untouched by the hardships of the peasants below. While peasants bent their backs to the soil, another class lived in stark contrast, surrounded by tapestries, feasts, and the clinking of goblets. The medieval nobility existed in a realm of privilege so vast, it seemed ordained by God himself. At the summit stood the king, but below him stretched a pyramid of lords, knights, and landed gentry. Their power was not earned, it was inherited, a birthright written in bloodlines and sealed with oaths. A noble's title came with rights peasants could scarcely dream of: the right to tax, to judge, to wage war, even to hunt in forests where a commoner caught poaching might lose a hand. Land was the true source of their wealth. A single lord might own dozens of manors, each worked by serfs bound to the soil. While peasants toiled for a share of the harvest, nobles collected rents, fees, and fines, payment for the protection they provided. Justice, too, was theirs to dispense. A lord's court settled disputes among villagers, but the punishments were rarely equal. A peasant stealing bread might be whipped. A noble stealing land might pay a fine. And then there were the symbols, the visible marks of separation. Nobles wore silks dyed in rich purples and crimsons, colors forbidden to lower classes by sumptuary laws. Their castles, towering over the landscape, were not just homes but statements of power. Thick stone walls to repel enemies, great halls to host lavish feasts, chapels to display piety and wealth. Even their pastimes set them apart. Hunting, especially with falcons, was a noble sport, a ritualized display of dominance over nature itself. But why did this system persist? Because it was woven into the very fabric of medieval thought. The church preached the great chain of being, a divine order where kings ruled by God's will, nobles governed by birthright, and peasants obeyed. To challenge this was to risk chaos or hellfire. Yet privilege came at a price. Nobles were expected to fight, to lead men into battle, to fund armies, to prove their worth in blood and steel. Their children were pawns in political marriages, their lives a performance of power. And when rebellions rose, as they sometimes did, the castles that sheltered them became targets. For the peasant gazing up at those walls, the noble's world was as distant as the moon. But for the nobles themselves, it was simply the way things were and ought to be. The nobility's power wasn't just held, it was actively maintained. Knights swore oaths to lords, who in turn answered to kings, creating a web of loyalty enforced by land grants. A rebellious vassal could lose his estates, a loyal one might gain more. This system, called feudalism, turned governance into a pyramid of favors and threats. Even law bent to their will. Trial by combat, where a noble could prove innocence by winning a duel, was a privilege denied to peasants. Education, too, was guarded. While most nobles were barely literate, their sons learned Latin, law, and the art of war in castles or monasteries. Knowledge was power, and power was hoarded. Yet cracks sometimes appeared. A poor knight might sink into obscurity. A shrewd peasant could rise as a merchant. And when the Black Death wiped out half of Europe, the survivors, peasants included, found they could demand better wages. The nobility responded with laws freezing wages, desperate to preserve the old order. In the end, their privileges weren't just about wealth or comfort. They were about identity, the unshakable belief that some were born to rule and others to serve. And for centuries, that belief held firm until the world began to change. The medieval nobility's legacy is written in stone, in the castles that still stand, in the titles that endure. But it's also written in the rebellions they crushed, the inequalities they enforced, and the stark line they drew between those who mattered and those who did not. The lives of medieval peasants were defined by relentless toil, scarcity, and submission, a stark contrast to the opulence and authority of the nobility. Their suffering was not accidental but woven into the very structure of feudal society, where power, privilege, and oppression were systematically enforced. Peasants spent their days bent over fields, their hands calloused from labor, their bodies weary from dawn until dusk. They lived in cramped, smoky huts, sharing space with livestock, their meals meager and monotonous, coarse bread, thin soups, and whatever the land grudgingly provided. Hunger was a constant companion, especially in years of poor harvests, when famine crept through villages like a silent plague. Disease, too, lurked in the shadows, striking down the young and old with equal indifference. Yet their suffering extended beyond physical hardship. They were bound to the land, legally and economically, with little hope of upward mobility. Heavy taxes and feudal dues drained what little surplus they produced, leaving them trapped in a cycle of debt and dependence. Justice was rarely on their side. Local lords acted as judges, and punishments were often swift and severe for those who dared resist. Rebellions, when they arose, were crushed mercilessly, reinforcing the brutal hierarchy that kept them in place. The nobility, meanwhile, lived in a world of castles, feasts, and political maneuvering. Their privileges, land ownership, legal immunity, military power, were justified by divine right and tradition. They hunted in forests forbidden to peasants, wore fine fabrics the poor could never afford, and settled disputes in courts that favored their status. Their children inherited wealth and titles, while peasant families passed down only hardship. This stark divide was not merely economic, but ideological. The church preached that social order was God's will, that suffering in this life would be rewarded in the next. Peasants were taught obedience, while nobles were raised to command. The system endured because it was designed to, because questioning it meant risking everything. Yet within this suffering, there were flickers of resilience. Peasants found solace in community, in shared stories by the fire, in festivals that offered fleeting joy. Some resisted in quiet ways, poaching, hiding grain, fleeing to towns where feudal bonds were weaker. And when the Black Death reshaped Europe, the survivors seized what little power they could, demanding better wages and rights. The medieval peasant's life was one of silent endurance, a testament to human survival under crushing oppression. Their suffering was not inevitable but engineered, a product of a world that saw them as tools rather than people. And in remembering their struggles, we recognize how deeply inequality can be embedded in society and how hard-fought the path to justice has always been. And so we leave the Middle Ages, not with fanfare, but with quiet reflection. The past, with all its shadows, reminds us of the fragility of progress and the enduring strength of those who lived unseen. As we step away from the world of medieval peasants, Thomas Becket, witch hunts, and the privileges of the nobility, we find ourselves reflecting on the deep contrasts between the lives of the powerful and the powerless. These 4 segments have taken us on a journey through history, painting vivid pictures of lives filled with struggle, sacrifice, and, in some cases, unimaginable luxury. But beneath the surface of these stark differences, there is a common thread that connects all: the relentless pursuit of survival, power, or faith. The peasants, whose daily existence was defined by endless toil and uncertainty, were the lifeblood of the medieval world, yet their voices were often unheard. Their lives were shaped by the land they worked and the oppressive systems that kept them in servitude, yet they found ways to persevere. The nobility, on the other hand, lived in a world of comfort and privilege, their every need catered to by those beneath them. But even within the walls of their grand castles, there were shadows of doubt and fear. Power, it seems, is always fragile, and the pursuit of it is never free from the risks of betrayal, jealousy, and loss. Thomas Becket's story serves as a poignant reminder of the sacrifices made in the name of faith and justice. His unwavering commitment to the church, even in the face of political pressure from his closest ally, King Henry II, shows us that loyalty to one's principles can have far-reaching consequences. Becket's martyrdom marked a turning point in the balance of power between the monarchy and the church, and his legacy lives on in the lessons we can learn about standing up for what we believe, even at great personal cost. The witch hunts, steeped in superstition and fear, reveal how quickly societies can turn on their own in the face of the unknown. The women accused of witchcraft were often powerless, marginalized, and vulnerable, their fates sealed by the hysteria of the time. In many ways, these hunts represent the darkest corners of human nature, the fear of the other, the desire to blame, and the willingness to sacrifice innocent lives to maintain order. Lastly, the world of the nobility, with its opulence and privilege, offers a sharp contrast to the lives of peasants and those who lived outside the castle walls. Yet, even within their gilded lives, the nobility were not immune to the challenges of power. Their carefully constructed world of wealth, political intrigue, and social alliances was as fragile as it was grand. The power they held came at a cost, the cost of responsibility, the cost of constant vigilance, and the cost of maintaining their status in a world that was constantly changing. In the end, these stories of peasants, bishops, accusations, and rulers remind us that history is not just about grand events and powerful figures. It is about the lives of ordinary people, the sacrifices they make, and the ways in which power, faith, and fear shape the world. It is a reminder that no matter where we stand in the social order, the forces of history are always at work, shaping our lives in ways we may never fully understand. As we drift off into the quiet of the night, let us carry with us the stories of these lives, these struggles, and these moments in time, knowing that they have shaped the world we live in today. And in the stillness of the night, we can rest, knowing that history is not just a distant memory, but a living, breathing force that continues to echo through the ages. Good night.